Okay, now we're going to get crazy. Uh, just for the sake of it, let's call this science fiction. But I was thinking, maybe that actually my successor is already a subscriber. Or if nothing else, this being in the cloud will reach the right party at the right time. And perhaps now is the time for me to talk about this. I've already told you about my work in cannabinoids. Don't care whether you believe me or not. All the people that matter in my life know and are familiar with my work, have copies of various parts of it, perhaps not all of it, but of course, many of my colleagues have retired and passed away. But, sorry, slight interruption there. This could go a while, so hang on to your seats. Those of you who are technically minded may find this fascinating, you may not. Where to begin is the question. In the early 1990s, as I really began heavy research and experimentation, I ran into a fellow researcher, Mickey, who was employed by an elderly female who was in search of rejuvenation, and that's one of the things he was working on. We already had discovered the telomeres, some will pronounce it telomeres, and the telomerase inhibitor. And the science fact is that since the late 80s, we've had the ability. This is where I had to join my specialty with Mickey's, which is, and kind of, had pulled down his efforts, let him know that what he was seeking for couldn't be done without causing great disease. And later turned out it would be cancer. But by the late 80s, I'm pretty sure they're probably alive today and well. And maybe I'll talk about it. I saw something in 1998 in San Francisco. That'll be a whole different program. I've got it on one of my other channels, actually on my original channel, which maybe on my second one. But we've had the ability since the late 80s. That's what I was arguing with Mickey, is if you try to do it at the multicellular level, when you do it in a juvenile or adult, you're going to have pathological results, because these constructs at the end of the DNA were discovered in cancer research. And you might want to start Googling up terms like telomeres, the theoretical high flick limit, that's HAYFLICK, high flick limit. But we've had the technology at the zygotic level. That's what I argued with Mickey, is it can be done when humans are one cell, when ovum and sperm have joined. You could administer the telomerase inhibitor, and with very little fear of creating a neoplast, extend the length of the telomeres, which are literally, if you want to look at it from a biblical point of view, if you remember, God restricted our lifespans after Methuselah and all of them, because we were bad. He restricted us to 70 years, 140. And in my lifetime, they interviewed and studied people that were up to 140 years old. That was published in National Geographic. Was the only really honest gerontological study. Yeah, I'm going to be spend a good part of the day speaking in technical terms to a couple of beautiful women. And this may be it. This may be my final task, is to pass on the formula. If you want to know the formula, you're going to have to hang around. Well, no, I'm going to give it to you very quickly here. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I have a feeling that somewhere in India or in Africa, where you can do any kind of medical experiment you want to, almost completely unhindered by any legal restraints, constraints, that shit by 1990, they'd probably already created a child at the single cell zygotic level, just one little tiny little microliter of telomerase inhibitor. Boom, you got a child that will live to be as old as Methuselah or longer. But I keep arguing, and over the decades I've had to consider the fact of this exploding population, the problems of how do you prevent dementia, how do you prevent microbes from figuring out the microbes that are on the outside and the inside of all of us, how do you prevent them from eventually deciding to have you for lunch? Please, I know a lot of you are attracted to me because I am a funny person, a hilarious person, but I'm also a brain, and a very serious brain, a very good brain. And I'm about to share with you shit that you don't know anything about. So let me get on with it. Probably by 1990, I'm figuring maybe one of the Swiss companies or some other researcher had I think I'd prefer to do it in India. In India, you can sell your own organs, you can. And there's probably people alive right now that are 20 to 30 years old with the potential to live 1,000 years. Didn't know that, did you? See, if you have half a brain, you watch this channel, you'll learn some shit. Now, it took me about 10 years. Oh, I hope I don't have to break this into 2 parts. I think I'm going to have to. I feel that urinary urge coming upon me. Maybe not. Once I had decided, theorized, hypothesized that cannabis will cure cancer by replacing arachidonyl ethanolamide, then I began thinking about the possibility of, actually, I'm pretty sure I could do it right now. I still have some questions regarding tumor necrosis factor and other things that are controlled by arachidonyl ethanolamide, endocannabinoids, or cannabis. There's a few, and actually I would prefer to, I'm going to give it to you right now. I've already told you this. We've had the ability at the zygotic level, not in an adult, not in the egg or the sperm, only when they've joined when it's one cell, you have just a brief window of the possibility of administering some telomerase inhibitor, extending the telomeres to the theoretical high flick limit, and you're looking at 1,000 years, a lifespan of 1,000 years. It's about what the theoretical high flick limit would be, probably minimum. So this is actually one of the many things that started making me see that, yeah, there's a lot of truth to the Bible. So let's jump ahead to the future, to 23 years ago. I was pondering whether you could halt aging in adults, because we had the answer by then that cannabis will cure cancer. That's the problem, is in an adult, if you administer the telomerase inhibitor, although try finding any research on this, it ain't going to happen. It's not going to be published. It will not be spoken aloud. It will not be put into print outside of the house. I'm sure it's been done in some country somewhere, and I'm pretty sure that the results have been pretty hideous. So this was my formula that maybe someone later gets a hold of this video, is that if I were to do it to try to halt aging in myself, I would obtain the non-radio labeled or produce the telomerase inhibitor in my own laboratory. And here's where you come into, I think it would be best to use actual, real, biological, natural from a mammal. A cow would be, just because of the mass quantities that would be needed, because, see, I'm still uncertain about how long one would have to prep the patient before administration of the inhibitor, and how long to have to do some animal experimentation first, obviously. I'd probably go with both swine and primates. But I'm really quite sure that the formula for halting aging, you're not going to rejuvenate. That's not going to happen. I just can't see that happening. But you could possibly halt your own aging at whatever age you're at, provided you had at least these two things, which is the telomerase inhibitor and massive quantities of real arachidonyl ethanolamide. And probably one of the easiest ways to produce it, unfortunately, is a violation of Jewish law. You'd have to be brutal to the animal. I'd probably select cattle, since they are cattle, although shouldn't be any difference between that and swine arachidonyl ethanolamide. And it's just that the cattle are bigger and will produce more, but you'd still probably have to run through, I don't know how many thousands of heads of cattle. You'd have to use a computer-controlled impactor. They did it with mice. Now, I will tend to slip into the collegial we, the royal we, occasionally, because their current work have been impossible without my theoretical work, and my work is impossible without theirs. You know, it's a shared thing. That's why I'll slip frequently and say we. But I think it's more than possible to administer the telomerase inhibitor. I would begin, though, an IV drip of, it would be a timed, measured dose. Durations are not very long, so it'd have to be about every 45 minutes, deliver a full dose of arachidonyl ethanolamide from the spines and brains of cattle that have been mechanically impacted in the spine. You would have to essentially kind of brutalize the cow before immediately then, because you really want to preserve intact the spinal cord and the brain. And you'd immediately have to chill it and take it apart carefully and remove the tissue, and then go through the separation process. None of it cheap. It could take 1,000, it could take 10,000 head of cattle to produce enough. I don't know, since we really haven't done it and quantified it. But that's the formula. I think I am going to keep this fairly short. This is like, I think one of the last things is the METHUSELAH Project. Let's call it that. And let's consider this just a work of science fiction of a slightly off-kilter mind. Yeah, sure I am. You know, how I'm using it has been to have toothless hobos and homos attacking me on here when they can barely even spell their own fucking name. So that's pretty much there's a possibility, because of the way, give me a second here. One of the magical divine things about cannabis is that It has non-neurological functions, and it will see it's a little complicated there, because that's part of, whether or not you need to control like tumor necrosis factor and a couple other chemical factors during this process of halting aging and extending the telomeres. It could actually be a fairly brief process, but that may also require like a steady IV drip of arachidonyl ethanolamide and just in saline. It may only take a few days, may not take very long at all. Every time a car passes it. What was the point I was going to make? That's essentially it. It's as to whether or not to use cannabis in combination. Mm-hmm. I still got it. I'll still keep you on track. It's one of the things that I constantly consider when I'm doing my little work in my head. People think I'm just staring at the tree or something. I am, but I'm still working on. This is one of the things I work on. And I told you I still have projects I still work on. This is one of them. There's a possibility that the combination of arachidonyl ethanolamide and cannabis may be ideal in this halting of aging, because in radio-labeled studies, it shows that it's just that the delta 9 will actually back off the neuroreceptors in favor of arachidonyl ethanolamide. Let it do its one-fold affinity, and then it'll come back. So you have to consider, and it would be worth experimenting before attempting it, certainly on yourself, to see if you can use both, because it may be ideal to use both arachidonyl ethanolamide and its analog delta 9 THC, because if the delta 9 will back off the neurological sites, the CBNR1, then while arachidonyl ethanolamide is doing its, if the delta 9 will back off, which is shown in studies that it will, then you have like the best of both worlds. Both are working. So that's one thing that would have to be, some experimentation would have to be carried out on test animals. And actually, swine are the closest to humans. They're really better than monkeys, but with monkeys we get, I think, a greater range of emotions and better feedback from them, better cues, and a different kind of psychology than the greedy pig, although humans are kind of greedy pigs. So I've actually covered a lot of the majority of all you have to do is really look at all the chemistry that's related to arachidonyl ethanolamide, as it cures a neoplasm, a cancer, without damaging any other cells, and do some experimentation with all three, the telomerase inhibitor, and I would actually start the arachidonyl ethanolamide before the administration, and then you might want to have vaporized cannabinol, no combustion, strictly vaporization for the patient to inhale while waiting for the extension of the telomeres to the theoretical high flick limit. I've pretty much given you the secret to halting aging in under 20 minutes, 19 minutes and 50 seconds. That's it. Is this a work of fiction or the work of a brilliant mind? And I think I'm going to leave it right here. That's the basic formula. It's possible that just the telomerase inhibitor and cannabis would be enough. But it might be best to extract arachidonyl ethanolamide from I'd have about enough from 10,000 cattle that have been carefully impacted along the spine and then processed. All the technology is there right now to do this. The children, there are children that may have been born in India 30 years ago that will live to be as old as Methuselah. That you don't already know this. This tells me how far you've been away from science. Well, I've been living in the middle of it. So I'm going to keep it short here. This is the science fiction piece known as the Methuselah Project by Kent Kruger, directed to his successor sometime now or in the future. I've given you all the basics. All the rest of the stuff is in print regarding chemistry and stuff. Probably the most problematic is going to be what will tumor necrosis factor be doing during this process. Be one of the critical things to look at. There's several others, but it will come to you naturally as you review the literature. This is meant for the entertainment of my subscribers and for their enlightenment that there are probably right now walking among us maybe hundreds or thousands of people that will live to be 1,000 years old. But the question is will they become demented? Will they acquire too much inherited wealth and be the end of this planet, the end of humanity? Or will they be a boon to humanity? Those are the biggest questions. I guess I should finish by putting in this, is that, as I mentioned, the two biggest problems you deal with in long life are dementia, and the way to combat that is triggering orientation response. Look it up. Bells and whistles. You have to even listen to music that you don't like, just so you get, listening modern Indian music as opposed to classical Indian music. Yeah, that'll drive you batshit nuts and stuff. You have to sometimes go through torturous things to keep triggering orientation response and keep compressing memory. You're not necessarily going to grow. You're not going to grow a bigger brain. You're not going to grow a new memory space. And then there's the problem of are you going to be forced to live in a sterile environment in which everything is essentially nuked before it enters, your environment? Because, germs tend to mutate over real long periods of time, and what was once probiotic becomes antibiotic, your biotic. It becomes a pathogen. It happens all the time. And pathogens become harmless, just like the Spanish lady flu that my parents lived through in 1918, 1919. So, several factors to look at. One of the biggest is dementia. And also, in this exploding population, overstimulation. Because this should be my final words on this. The human brain and the human psyche has never evolved beyond handling about 30 faces. That's why we have so much kind of low-grade insanity in our culture, is that we have never grown past the basic tribal 30 family village, 30 face village kind of psychology. We really haven't. Human beings now are super overstimulated. And it would be wise to consider that if you're going to extend your life, that you might have to accept the fact that you're going to be kind of living in a bubble. You're going to have a certain amount of isolation and sterilization of everything that comes into your space. So, wish I had a happy ending here, but I don't have, because sooner or later, your life will end. Maybe in that 1,000 years, you could figure out a way to prevent that. You get my point? That's the only happy ending I can see here, is that if given 1,000 years, I think I might be able to do it. I don't really have the engineering skills because I'm left-handed. So we all have our limitations. Mine is right hemisphere, intuitive leaps, theoretical. I've given you the theoretical, hypothetical, and now it's up to you to figure out whether this is science fiction or science soon to be fact. That there are children alive that may live as long as Methuselah, I believe that to be science fact. And that's the first time I've used the word believe in a long time. I think it is science fact. I have every reason to believe that because of the unscrupulous nature of corporations and their desire and their search for knowledge. But can you do it in an adult? And you have no control over that zygote, which way it's going to go psychologically. So, but think about it. If you had 1,000 years, could you achieve an eternal consciousness? The basic law of entropy says no. So that's the final statement. Entropy says no. Maybe Robin Williams figured that out. Entropy gets us all in the end, except the Lord.